welcome back to my channel. I'm Rachel, the owner and creator here at the Eclectic Cottage in Spokane, Washington. Happy Sunday evening, everyone. For today's video, I have part 2 of the Little Dresser Saga. I ran into some more issues with the dresser of my own making, mind you, but it means that I don't have it completely finished at this point. But I wanted to at least kind of show you guys what happened, what I did to fix it, and where I am with the dresser at this point. I am still at the shop. It's about 5 p.m. Sunday evening, so sorry this video is so late tonight, but I wanted to get it finished, so here we are. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into part 2 of the Little Dresser Saga. Now, if you caught the first part of my dresser makeover, you saw that I had finally gotten all of the drawers sanded out and the body of the dresser sanded and everything ready to move on to stain and paint. The first step was getting my drawers stained, but before that, I needed to get rid of all the sanding dust that was left behind. So I am just starting off with a big brush, getting most of the bulk of the dust out, and then I'm following that up with some mineral spirits and just giving each drawer a nice cleaning before I start staining. This will not only help clean the wood, but it will also help to open up the pores so that it accepts the stain really well. Once I had all 6 drawers nice and clean, it was time to start the staining process. For my stain, I'm using a very dark gel stain, and I'm just applying that with a cheap little chip brush. And I picked a really dark color because there were still a few little areas that I just couldn't quite get all of the old stain out, and I was hoping this dark color would help to disguise all of that and cover everything up. I am going over the inside of each drawer, the rim of each drawer, and the outside of each drawer. And once I have my gel stain applied, I'm going in with some shop towels and just wiping back any excess stain. Now, as I was completing this first drawer, I realized that there were some areas that just weren't picking up the stain perfectly, and after all of the time that I have spent on this dresser, that was a little bit disappointing. But at this point, I just had to accept the fact that this wasn't going to be 100% perfect. I was just going to work on getting it as close as I possibly could and just be happy with that. So I am moving on, just kind of soldiering on, I guess, to get the rest of these drawers stained. Once I had finished staining all of my drawers, I went ahead and set them aside to dry overnight before I came back in with a top coat to seal everything. Since the wood was kind of rough, I was hoping the top coat would help to smooth things out and also, of course, to seal in that stain. And for my top coat, I'm using Sweet Pickins Top Coat in Matte, and I am just using a brush to apply it. I also went ahead and applied a coat of the top coat to the front of each drawer just to help make sure that there wasn't any bleed through when I went ahead and started painting. Once I had finished with the two smaller drawers, I grabbed one of the larger drawers, and as I grabbed it, I realized I had a little bit of lifting veneer in one corner. So I grabbed out my wood glue and a little paintbrush, and I just worked that glue down underneath that lifted veneer and then pressed it down and set it aside to dry. I grabbed both of my other drawers. You can see me here just kind of going around checking to see if I had any other lifting areas, and then I just addressed each one with a little bit more glue. On the last drawer, I found that I had a pretty significant area in the one corner that had lifted. So I really worked hard to work that glue in there. And then I ended up using one of my big clamps to actually clamp it together so that I had a nice tight bond. And then I set it aside to dry. Once my glue was dry, it was time to go ahead and seal the larger drawers. And I went ahead and did the same thing with these that I did with the small ones, just applying a good even coat of that top coat to all sides, the top rim, the back, and the inside. When I was finally finished sealing all of my drawers, I set them aside to dry and went to work on the body of the dresser. The first step was to clean it up. It was pretty dusty, so I grabbed out my mineral spirits again and just soaked a dry shop towel with those and then used that to wipe down the entire dresser, the inside, all of the little bars that go across the front, the outside, everything, just making sure that it was all nice and clean and free of sanding dust. Once I had the body of my dresser clean, it was finally time to start painting. I cannot tell you guys how good it felt to finally be at the point where I could put some paint on this little dresser. For my paint, I'm using Sweet Pickins milk paint in the color Creamy, which is this beautiful off-white color. I did not add any extra bond to my paint for this because I am basically going over pretty raw wood, and when you're going over a porous surface, you really don't need to worry about extra bond. I went ahead and painted the inside of the bars that the drawers ride on. I didn't paint any further than that on the inside of the dresser, though. I was very careful to just keep it to these bars, and I only went over where the drawers would slide with a couple coats of paint. So here it is after one coat of paint. I knew at this point I was probably going to need 3 or 4 coats, but I was okay with that. I was putting a really light color over some very dark areas, so I was kind of prepared for having to use several coats of paint. You can see here though how much better it looks just after 2 coats. I think in the end, I put 3 coats of paint on the areas that were lighter wood, but I had to go over those inside panels that were darker with a 4th coat of paint. I was also very careful again not to put too much paint on those bars where the drawers slide in and out. And here is a picture of what the little dresser looks like after it was painted. Once I'd finished painting the body of the little dresser, I set that aside and went back to work on my drawers. Now, of course, I had worked very hard to sand and stain these drawers, and I had removed so much gunky paint from the top rim and even the bottom rim of each of these drawers that I wanted to be very careful to not repeat any of that, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't have any paint run over into my stained areas. So I am masking off every single drawer just to help ensure that the paint stays only on the front panel. Originally, this dresser came with some router details in the front of it. I quickly realized as I was working on the drawers, though, that a lot of that detail had been filled in with all of the gunky paint that I had removed. And if I didn't go ahead and fill what was left, I was really afraid I would end up with some weird blotchy looking design on the front of my dresser. So I am taking spackle and my little putty knife, and I am filling in all of that design. I was kind of sad. I really didn't want to have to do this, but again, I was not going to take the time to take a little pick and try and get all that paint out of this design. Once my spackle was all dry, I went ahead and grabbed my little hand sander and went over all of the drawers to smooth everything back out again. I am going over this with a 220 grit sandpaper. I didn't want anything too harsh, and I'm just kind of taking my time and going over each drawer. Then, once I was finished sanding, I grabbed a damp shop towel and wiped everything back down again to get it ready for paint. Now, here is where I am going to make a really big mistake and skip a very important step that I should have done. Some of you might know what I'm talking about. I will go over it a little bit later in the video. But once I was done wiping off the fronts of my drawers, I went in with some more of that Sweet Pickins milk paint in creamy. And I'm just trying to be very careful to not get too much paint on the drawer at a time so that I don't risk too much of it dripping onto the stained areas. Once I had finished painting all of the bigger drawers, I set them aside to dry and I went back to my little drawers. I had already painted these guys, so I just needed to peel off the masking tape, give them a really light sanding to knock any chunks off, and then wipe them down. So I did that really quick and then I went back to the big drawers. As I removed the masking tape from the bigger drawers, I realized I had kind of an issue going on. Where I had placed the spackle had all cracked and lifted a little bit. So you could really see the lines in the paint. So I first tried to sand everything smooth. So I just grabbed my hand sander and sanded this drawer nice and smooth again. And then I went over the paint with some paint with Extra Bond in it. I was hoping that maybe the Extra Bond would help to adhere everything together and I wouldn't have any more lifting. That, however, was not the case, and I ended up with more cracking and lifting as that paint dried. So as much as I really didn't want to, I took each drawer back outside and sanded it down with my orbital sander. I concentrated on the areas where I had the cracking and lifting, but I also wanted to make sure that the entire front of the drawer was still smooth, so I ended up having to sand quite a bit of my paint off of all of my drawers. Once I had all of my drawers sanded back down again, I went in with some Durham water putty this go around. I've always liked the water putty. To me, it seems like it's more suited for wood. I don't honestly know why I didn't use it in the first place, but I went ahead and just smoothed that out into all of my little detail on my drawers. Once that water putty was nice and dry, I went back in with some 220 grit sandpaper and sanded my drawers all nice and smooth again. Once the drawers were all sanded smooth again, I took them inside, wiped them down, and then I went about doing what I should have done in the first place was to seal my crackle to keep it from making the paint crack. So I am spraying a good coat of shellac over all of the areas where I had put putty, and then I'm setting those aside to dry. Once that was done, I went ahead and remasked all of my drawers again, and then I began the painting process back over again, putting another few coats of paint onto my dresser drawers. When my drawers were finally painted and dry, I went ahead and sanded around the edge. This really helped to remove the masking tape smoothly without accidentally peeling any of my paint with it. And then I sanded the tops of the drawers really quickly just to knock any chunks off and make sure they're nice and smooth. Wiped them back down, cleaned up a few little drips, wiped them inside and out to get them nice and clean, and I set them aside. I cannot tell you how happy I was to finally have them done. Then, since the drawers were finally finished, I took the body of the dresser outside and sanded it smooth. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't have any areas where I've got lifted paint or any chunks of paint anywhere. Once I was finished with that step, I drug it back inside and into my kitchen and then grabbed a damp shop towel and wiped everything down really well to get rid of all of the sanding dust. Now, back when I started this project, I had removed most of the drawer stops. There were a couple I just could not get out, but they were gunky and covered in paint. And honestly, I thought I had a bunch more, but it turns out I only had 4. So I went ahead and installed those. I have more coming. And then I went ahead and put the drawers in this little dresser just so I could kind of see what it looked like all painted. I'm loving how it's coming out, and I'm so thankful to almost be finished with it. Well, that is it from here for tonight, you guys. I am ready to go home, honestly, and I still have grocery shopping to do. So I am going to wrap this up and get out of here, but I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, please remember to give it a thumbs up. I so appreciate that. And if you haven't already, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel and then just hit the little notification bell so you don't miss anything. And then, of course, don't forget to drop a comment below. Let me know, what do you think of my progress so far on the little dresser? Man, that thing's giving me a run for my money. Anyway, just a quick reminder too, I do carry a pretty full line of paint and products here in my shop. I carry DIY paint and products as well as Sweet Pickins milk paint and products. I do have more flour sack. It came in yesterday. I just haven't had time to put it up on my website, but I'm hoping to get that done for you guys tomorrow. So if you're waiting for it, it is still 35% off through the end of January. I also carry Recycled Treasures decoupage papers, and I cannot wait to get the new release in. And of course, Redesign with Prima. And their new release should be coming out on the 29th. So if you need anything, please check those out at my website, and that's www.theeclecticcottagespokane.com. I so appreciate it. And let's see, for Thursday's video, please let me have the little dresser finished for you guys and be able to show that to you. I would also love to show you some of the displays that I am in the process of trying to build in the middle of trying to get the little dresser finished. So I'm kind of hoping to show those to you as well. So I hope you'll join me back here on Thursday for that. Until then, have a fantastic whatever is left of your weekend and beginning of the week. Thank you guys so much for being here. I always appreciate it, and I will see you on Thursday. Bye.